Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of April of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important, the most interesting updates as usually are coming from Bakhmut. In my previous video I told you that according to few very reliable Russian sources, as a result of clashes, storming operation and fierce fightings, the Russians captured a town by the name of settlement by the name of Khromovo, this one. And at least few sources confirmed that information, that Wagner's entered that village, established control, then according to those sources, the Ukrainians made or were making few counter-offensive operations in this area, trying to regain their lost positions. And later, some Russian sources, some Ukrainian sources and some Russian sources were saying that as a result of counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to return control at least over part of this settlement Khromovo. The situation there is very complicated, and this situation is completely covered with the fog of war. I believe and I expect that no matter who controls this settlement currently, half or the entire settlement and so on, I believe and I expect that within the next few days we're going to see like the entire control, establishing of entire control over this settlement. From the other side, the Russians are pushing from the railroadways in direction of the western fortifications, and as you can see, the gray line currently goes along the ex-military base, and the Russians are saying that they managed to establish control over the territory on the east of the ex-military base. They captured the block with high buildings and they entered at the eastern part of the ex-military base. So we can say that the final part of the battle for western part of Bakhmut has started, because if you remember, we discussed that if the Russians are able to take control over the ex-military base, after that we can start counting not even days but maybe hours before the entire western Bakhmut is going to fall. I have already updated the western sources map, trying to show you the current situation in Bakhmut and the vicinity of Bakhmut. I have marked the territory on Khromovo as a blue cloud, saying that this territory is under Russian control. I assume and I believe that this town is under Russians. I believe that the Russians, currently there are very heavy clashes there, and they just don't want to publish the unconfirmed information, some sources, and they expect some video and photo confirmation from this area. Anyway, this settlement or in the gray zone, or there are heavy clashes, and this territory is under Russian control. The Russians developed advance in the eastern part of the western Bakhmut, and currently they're pushing, of course, in the northern part in direction of Khromovo as well, trying to connect the forces, and now they're pushing in direction of the ex-military base, trying to clear this area and to cut the same forces and encircle some forces and so on. And there is a fierce fightings in this area. The Russians are trying to establish final control over this south part of Bakhmut, to take control of these big buildings and the MiG-17 stadium in this area. So that's it about Bakhmut. Soon this town is going to fall anyway. I don't believe the Ukrainians are able to take control, to take back this town, but we'll see. We'll see what is going to be next. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes in Donetsk front line in the vicinity of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians lost 360 soldiers, 22 armored vehicles, 3 artillery systems. And very interesting piece of information from that update, Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, is that among 22 armored vehicles, the loss of Ukrainian side during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 7 armored infantry vehicles and 8 armored fighting vehicles. So as you can see, when we try to analyze the structure of the losses among the armored vehicles during the past days, we saw that the major part of the losses were just light vehicles that the Ukrainians were using for evacuation, rotation, getting taking out of their wounded soldiers and so on. But for the previous 24 hours, the number of losses among the armored vehicles significantly increased. From 22 units that Ukrainians lost, 15 units are armored vehicles, like very powerful, like Bradley, like Striker, the same type. And that means that Ukrainians were using the armored vehicles maybe for evacuation from the western part of Bakhmut, but they were discovered, spotted, and destroyed somewhere in the central fields between Ivanovskaya, Bakhmut, and Chasov Yar, somewhere there. The losses are very heavy. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that there was a lot of interesting updates in the vicinity of this town. For example, the Russians published and reported about bombing Bogdanovka. They continue bombing this area because the Ukrainians used this area for sending and moving their forces in direction of the 0506 road to unblock this road for, I don't know for what reason, because this town is blocked safely from the Russian side. But anyway, the Ukrainians are continuing sending their waves by wave. Very interesting updates are coming from South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area. The Russians are saying that as a result of bombing, artillery duels, and clashes with commandos and so on, the Ukrainians lost 145 soldiers, 11 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems. As you can see, the level of losses from the Ukrainian side are growing every single day, very slowly, but the level is growing. And that means that the Russians intensifying their activity in this area, their attacks, and so on. And now we see a very interesting configuration on the front lines. Very interesting configuration. Let's go back to the Western sources map. We see that according to the number and facts that we can find based on the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation report, we see some intensifying of the Russian actions on the Kupiansk-Liman front line. I'm making these arrows trying to show you they're not representing the real picture that the Russians are moving in direction of Borova. I'm trying to show you, like by these arrows, that the level of losses has been increased, at least on the Kupiansk front line, in comparison with the previous days or something like this, weeks, months at all. And the same situation we can see on the South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area. So the Russians increase and intensify their actions. There are many reasons why did the Russians do this. First of all, the Ukrainians from their side are bringing more and more forces to this area before the greatest counteroffensive operation. For example, some Russian sources are saying that Ukrainians managed to accumulate up to 12,000 soldiers in Gulay-Polye. So this is already attack phase. It's around 2.5 brigades that they can use to attack Pologi just from Gulay-Polye. We know that the entire number of brigades that Ukrainians are going to use for the counteroffensive operation is 15 completely newly created, mainly mechanized and airborne brigades with Western weapon, more than 1,200 units of just armored vehicles, Western production, around 200 tanks with the uranium polluted shells and so on. It's a very powerful feast. But now we're talking about the Russians. We see, furthermore, a few days ago, the Western sources published a very interesting article. The article was that there is a piece of information, there is some chances that when the weather becomes better, no matter the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation in the south that they're going to launch anyway, there is a very high chances that the Russians will launch their own offensive operation. And according to based on the facts that we receive from the front line, from the Ministry of Defense, from the independent military experts and so on, we see some kind of intensification of the actions in South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area and on the Kupiansk front line. Currently, if you take a look at this arrow, you might think that the Russians are going to encircle this area. No, it's not an operation about encirclement. I see that currently the Russians are trying to stretch the Ukrainian forces between Kharkiv area and Zaporozhye area. And the main logistic line between these two areas is this small blue cloud between Pavlovka, Lazova, Orlovka. So this is the main logistic hub that Ukrainians need to use for regrouping between these two front lines, Kupiansk and, let's say, South Donetsk. And if the Russians attack on the Kupiansk, the Ukrainians, if they want to redeploy their forces, they need to use this logistic block for regrouping and resending their forces to Kharkiv or to this area. And it's a perfect situation for the Russians. They don't need to think a lot. They need to try to find the Ukrainian position. They just need to establish some focus and some 24 hours control over this square, and then they will know everything about the Ukrainians, about their forces, about the level of regrouping, which forces they're sending where, and so on. And I believe they're doing this right now. But I see that the Russians are stretching the Ukrainian forces by this attacks from completely two opposite front lines, from the northern one, the most northern one, and the most southern one. I'm not talking about Kherson area. I'm talking about the front lines that have the common combat line between Ukrainians and the Russians. Very interesting. And I do expect that the Russians are going to launch this offensive operation at the same time when the Ukrainians launch their offensive operation in Zaporozhye to encircle Seversk and to get to Kramatorsk-Slaviansk agglomeration. And they're planning to do something. And I see this. At least I have like maybe fifth or third feeling that tells me that the Russians are going to do this. Let's discuss in more detail the Zaporozhye area. The Russians are saying that they destroyed a few warehouses in this area. They destroyed a lot of drones in this area, positions of the Ukrainians. When talking about Ugledar, the Russians continue erasing process of Ugledar. I believe we can start counting weeks before the entire Ugledar is going to be erased, and after that the Russians will be open the gates in direction of Kurakhova, this area. And I believe that the erasing of Ugledar will be synchronized with the erasing of Marinka from the north and from the south, and as soon as the Russians are able to erase the western part of Marinka and the Ugledar itself, they will start like pushing in this area as well. Or at least the Ukrainians are going to get more forces there, and the Russians will just get another wall, another barrier, and they will start the process from the beginning. But to tell the truth, there are no big town settlements like Ugledar and Marinka after Ugledar and Marinka, and the next big town is Kurakhova and Velika Novosovka. All these towns is just small villages, and I don't think that the Russians are going to have a lot of problems by passing these villages and settlements. When talking about Kherson, the Russians published another video of destroyed Su-25 in this area. After the independent military experts start publishing video and information about the fact that the Ukrainians very slowly, step by step, but they increase their expanse along these islands in the Dnipro River, and the Russians start bombing this area heavily without even counting guided bombs, missiles, nothing. They just took a decision to erase these islands in the Dnipro River as well. Furthermore, they sent some soldiers from the Russian side to this bridge, to this part of Kherson area, and they made a video that this bridge and this road is under Russian control, and the updates that we saw on the Institute of Study of War map, they were saying that it was a fake updates. Anyway, we're gonna follow this situation. I believe that we are going to see the intensifying of Ukrainian actions in this area as well, and they will try to get to the small town Alyoshki if it's possible. For many reasons, they need to do this to stretch the Russian army, to change their focus, and just to create another point of pressure. And they will push, and maybe they're able to achieve something. Who knows? We'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel. Put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.